Chase Oliver won the Libertarian Party's presidential nomination Sunday after 7 rounds of voting at the party's convention in Washington, D.C. The 38-year-old candidate, who has run for Congress multiple times in Georgia, appealed to the voters by focusing on bringing libertarian values to a broader audience. Both Donald Trump and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. spoke at the convention over the weekend, with Trump facing loud booing throughout his short speech. Now, while Trump attended and he spoke, he did not submit the paperwork to be considered as a nominee when it came time for the party to vote. Joining me now is Democratic strategist Chuck Rocha and former spokesman for President George W. Bush, Pete C. Good to see you both. Pete, let me start with you. Trump usually speaks in front of a warmer audience. He's not used to having his ego bruised like he did. What does it say about where his campaign is right now that he would go to something like this? What do you think?
Well, the bullish way of looking at it is this is a move of confidence, that the Trump campaign feels good about their position in polling and their position moving into the November general election. So they're starting to branch out and reach to different constituencies that he normally, as you say, normally speaks to the base, and the Libertarian Party convention clearly not the base. But the bearish view is that they are afraid of the impact that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. might have on this election, and he's got to go scoop up each and every single individual vote that he can get. So it really just depends on your point of view why he went there.
Yeah, and Chuck, your point, I mean, do you take the bearish point of view or the bullish point of view? Does it signal that he's worried about RFK Jr.?
I think it just shows how close this election is going to be. Those of us who run elections around the country every day are doing focus groups every day. I've been working in campaigns for 34 years. This is the closest I've ever seen. You really have a solidification of people that are on the right and on the left. And what Donald Trump, and I would even say Joe Biden, are doing is any little sliver of support for Joe Biden, it could be Nikki Haley supporters. For Donald Trump, he's worried about RFK, just like Joe Biden is worried about it, because in these battleground states, in just these 5 states, just a minuscule amount of votes are going to make a huge difference when the margins are just so narrow.
Well, to that point, Pete, let's actually talk about who Trump's VP could be. So Politico has some new reporting out about who Hill Republicans think that Trump should choose. I want to read it for you. So some of them even want him to consider a rival he's publicly ruled out. Nikki Haley, who of course recently revealed she would be voting for him. And if Haley cannot make an improbable comeback, many Republican lawmakers want to see Trump pick one of 2 other former opponents with the same outside of MAGA allure, either Senators Tim Scott or Marco Rubio. Who's the better pick here? I mean, who gets him to where he needs to be?
I think Donald Trump needs to take the vice presidential selection process incredibly seriously. When we talk about those double haters, the voters who dislike both candidates, it could very well come down to that vice presidential pick, the person who is a heartbeat away from the presidency. We know that both Donald Trump and Joe Biden are not getting any younger. And there's going to be a lot of focus on Kamala Harris or whoever Donald Trump picks. I think the Nikki Haley pick might actually have the reverse effect and turn voters that voted for her away, and they're going to be angry. A Rubio or Tim Scott could actually fit the bill.
Chuck, I mean, what do you think? I mean, we continue to see in these primaries, I mean, Nikki Haley is polling not insignificant numbers. In some places, she's still polling 20% of votes. I mean, what do you think?
You know, to Pete's point, normally the vice president candidate, the vice presidential pick means nothing. Nobody goes to the ballot box to vote for the vice president. It's been looked at over years. People are like, well, we need to get a VP from Ohio or Florida so we can deliver those states. That's just not the case in a multimedia world that we're living in today. So Donald Trump is looking for something that he is not. He wants to pick somebody like a person of color, like Rep. Donald or Mr. Marco Rubio, or somebody in that vein, so he can maybe get a little more African-American vote or a few more Latino votes. Another place where he can expand the electorate is what he's looking for, because like what Pete said, the double haters are looking for an alternative. What is something that would draw them to them instead of just voting for something that's not the other person?
Let me ask you both to weigh in here. Obviously, the jury is going to have closing arguments in the Trump hush money case in New York, and they could have this case in their hands. They could have this in their hands as early as Wednesday. Regardless of what the verdict is, what's the Trump campaign strategy? Pete, let me start with you.
Donald Trump's going to declare himself the victor no matter what happens. If he is convicted, that will be validation of everything he has said about this trial being a sham and the judge being conflicted. And if he's acquitted, that would be vindication. And he's going to put a dark cloud above all the other indictments and cases that he is currently facing. So expect that no matter what happens, he will not hang his head in shame. He will declare victory.
Chuck, he's validation or vindication? What do you think?
I think it's going to be monetization. I think that people are going to make money off of this in both campaigns and use it to try to get to their base to raise money around either their victories or their losses, or to try to scare folks into saying, now see what happened, the justice system is rigged, or others saying justice was finally served. Because right now, as we get into the doldrums of summer, folks, your great reporting a while ago about everybody that's traveling for the Memorial Day weekend, do you think that they're really turned into politics? Well, they're not right now, but they will be soon. And some of them, like us on this TV, thus us watching this morning, we're following this closely. But the American people are just now, when they get back from summer vacation, going to be tuning into what's happening as we lead into the fall.
Fascination. Well, we shall see. Validation, vindication, or monetization. Pete C., Chuck Rocha, thank you both.